Evening, everyone. Please excuse my voice. The pollinating has begun. I'm Amanda Hellman. I'm the curator of African art here at the Carlos Museum. Before we get started, I wanted to remind everyone that we have another performance on Saturday at noon at Refuge Coffee in Clarkson, just on Ponce. So please join us again there. I think it'll be absolutely wonderful. But it's a pleasure to introduce tonight's featured artist, Anida Yoeu Ali. Anida is a performance artist, poet, global agitator, and senior artist in residence in the School of Interdisciplinary Arts and Sciences at the University of Washington, where she has taught courses including global agitation, art and activism, contemporary, quote, Muslim artists, performing diaspora, and Southeast Asian hip hop and urban arts. I wanted to just list a few because they sounded like amazing courses. About her students, she writes, as artists, their creativity can give rise to a critical consciousness where they become agents of change, who can respond and shape the world they live in instead of merely functioning and adapting to it. While this is her pedagogical statement, it is also the philosophy Anida lives by as an artist, as a Khmer woman, as an American woman, and as a change maker engaged in the serious work of play. Anida has received grants from the Rockefeller Foundation, the Ford Foundation, the NEA, and has exhibited all over the world, including the Malaysia Heritage Center in Singapore, the Southeast Asia Arts Fest in London, and the 5th Fukuoka Asian Art Triennial in Tokyo, just to name a few. In 2011, while on a Fulbright fellowship to Phnom Penh, Anida co-founded Studio Revolt, an artist-run media lab with Masahiro Sugano. Anida Yoeu Ali earned her BFA from the University of Illinois, Urbana-Champaign, and an MFA from the School of the Art Institute of Chicago. While this introduction is about Anida, I wanted to interject two thoughts as a token of gratitude for the work she has produced. The first is that while the Buddhist Bug was among the first works I pursued for And I Must Scream, it was only in the final months that I truly understood its role in the exhibition, which is laced with dark undertones. Or rather, it's overtly pretty dark. I wondered what happened to the monsters once they are unleashed. And I thought about how they may linger like plastic, melted down and reformed into things that we cannot recognize as the monsters, and how sinister that could be, luring us into complacency. And it was in this scary place that I found refuge in the embrace of the bug, and it turned the story into one of hope and love and regeneration. In the bug, I found the seeds of compassion, the key, I believe, to transforming the systems of destruction that the creatures in this exhibition represent into monsters of renewal, love, and healing. The second moment happened just 2 days ago when the bug was animated. My 10-month-old son crawled curiously up to the bug. He clearly wasn't afraid, but he also wasn't sure what he was witnessing. He wasn't straying too far from me, but he touched or grabbed the bug's nose to understand what he was seeing. But he also, for several minutes, just sat with the bug, who cooed to let him know that here in this gallery, amongst many monsters who are emblematic of fear and ruin, he is safe and loved. And with that, I would like to turn it over to Anida.
Assalamu alaikum. Hello. Walaikum salam. Bonjour. Chimriab sur. Susdai. Thank you for having me today, and for everybody who came out to the performance on Sunday and who may be coming, inshallah, to Saturday's performance at Refuge Coffee. I want to begin with a land acknowledgement. So this is my version of the land acknowledgement in consideration of where we're at. We, the bug, the artists, and this community present acknowledge that we live and work on unceded ancestral lands of the Muskogee Creek peoples and shared waters of all tribes and bands, named and unnamed. We recognize the sustained oppression, land disposition, and involuntary removals of the Muskogee and Cherokee peoples from Georgia and the Southeast. We are grateful to be guests in these lands and commit to solidarity in the struggle for Indigenous sovereignty. I would like to give my gratitude specifically to Madawachapi Horse, a student here of Indigenous ancestry who embodied the bug's legs during Sunday's performance. Now, the land acknowledgement reminds us of our connections and indebtedness to the people's original place names and the more than human kin where we live and work. And saying their names and learning their histories calls their spirits to life. This is a really important part of my practice of calling things into being and honoring presence. We pay respects to elders past, present, and emerging. And in acknowledging the connections to the land, I also always take a moment to acknowledge landlessness of the First Nations people and a growing refugee population. For the Ukrainians, the Palestinians, Cambodians, Yemenis, Syrians, and so many more. As a refugee and child of genocide survivors, I would like to recognize this contemporary moment in which communities locally and globally have been impacted by war, violence, and legacies of intergenerational trauma. So this video that I initially wanted to play a bit of, I think I'm going to wait till a bit more at the end. What I'd like to begin with is this quote here: artists need to create on the same scale that society has the capacity to destroy. It's a Lauren Bodden piece in LA, a neon sign. She borrowed the text from someone else, and it really speaks to my work and the way that I think about art. And when you define art as creation, it is inherently counter to destruction, that we have a duty and a responsibility to counter war, to counter fascism, to counter ideologies that oppress people and ultimately destroy spirits and destroy bodies and entire communities. And so I think about scale, the scale of my work, and the physical presence that it takes on, and the kind of iteration that's involved. Like every piece changes depending on the specific place that the work is taking place, and also the political moment that I take that into account. I want to begin with this year, 1975, because it's an important year for Khmer people. It is the year that the genocidal regime, the Khmer Rouge, took power, and then thus began this domino effect for my family and millions of other Cambodian Americans. I also want the people here to understand that effect, that in between 1975 and 1979, 1/5 of the Cambodian population were killed. That now, as you're hearing these numbers, you should be relating it to recent events in other countries. Particular to Cambodia, we also had 90% of our artists killed under the Khmer Rouge regime, which if artists are linked to one's essential cultural presence, this is another devastating number. And then for my family, who are Cham Muslims, we were targeted for extermination by the same regime who outlawed religion and ethnic minorities and saw difference as something detrimental to the new society that they were building. Then I want to take us to 1979. And for me, this is another important date. And for me, this is where we begin in a refugee camp between the border of Thailand and Cambodia, a camp whose name I do not know, We begin here in the in-between. We begin with these two photographs, 2 of 4. These are the images that I have of myself that are artifacts from a pretty traumatic period in my family's history. And it's also a reminder of my legacy. These images are the closest things to owning my baby photos, except here, I am not a baby. I'm about 4 or 5 years old. And I am, if you haven't spotted me by now, let's see if you can hear. People on Zoom, I am now pointing to the photos, and this one, this little girl that looks pretty boyish with the scorched hair, and look at that expression. I'm not sure what it is, a kind of squint, frightenedness. I'm not sure, but it sticks in my head. And she is next to this care package. This is my grandmother, who's not with us anymore. This is one of my uncles. Those are my aunties. There's my mother again. So these images are all that I have, and they are the result of, because my family is of mixed heritage. We are Khmer, Cham, Thai, and Malay. We have family in Thailand. And when we were told that the borders reopened, we walked from Battambang to the nearest refugee camp. And that was when word got to our Thai family that the borders had reopened and perhaps they should go to this place and see if we were still alive. And lo and behold, they took the photos, they gave us the care package, and they gave us the clothes that you see some of us wearing here. So we literally arrived, with nothing but the clothes on our backs, if we had any. I think that for me, it was really surviving those 3 years and 7 months and 20 days of the Khmer Rouge left an impact, an imprint, a desire to know more, to be more in life. And I place these family photos at the beginning of every talk to remind me not only where I come from, but also the ways in which photography continues to serve as a critical extension of myself and my place, and the ways in which photos can fill in lapses to memories, the gaps of absence to which there is no recovery. So had it not been for these photos, and there are 2 more in this collection, I would not have had this idea of even what this place looked like, because I'm pretty sure I blocked it from my childhood memory. And I have tried to work with photography in terms of those specific images. I have tried to stitch and restitch and silk screen and try to make something sort of visual with this work. But that's where I think I really figured out in my practice that I am not this kind of craft-based visual artist, that my work is really within the realm of performance and performance installation. And so I was part of an exhibition called 1975, where I did experiment with these images for sort of a final time. But I like that they sit as archival material to a family history that just sort of is there and ever present. Like, I don't need to make work about that. And you were looking at prior images with the barbed wires and the fences, and now you're looking at my house, in which we've taken down the fences and erected different signage. It's the Hello, How Are You public art project. And this was a way for us to introduce ourselves to the neighborhood and the community, to say we are artists and we want to have a conversation, knowing that people are dealing in Tacoma, at least, with issues of gentrification, and that artists definitely have a role in the gentrification of communities, but we can also help to further conversations that are more complex and that center the communities, as well as having a path for us as artists to be involved in that. So my work is really heavy on the process of research and ideas and looking at resources and creation and the audience. It's sort of all the things. Usually when I give these talks, it's usually to students or to younger artists. So I think you probably already know that all these things go into it. And then I think about, you know, the pervasive themes in my work around loss and absence and body as sight. And then one of the more important ones is activation through presence. And this idea of really honoring presence and the ways in which I do that, which is always through the public sphere of engagement, encounters and disruptions, or sometimes they're called interventions. I think they're all kind of a cluster. And then recognizing that the body is content, that the body itself, my body, has content, and it's never empty of that, that it's always processing and continually telling a story, even if it's not overt or linear. And some of these performances, you know, take me to right into the streets. And this performance is one that I tried out in the middle of traffic in Phnom Penh, Cambodia, and it really only lasted for minutes. This is also near the Prime Minister's house of residence, and so it was only a matter of time before security came by. But this was part of a larger body of work that was about putting the artists in the public space of engagement, taking them out of their studios, because they started to have this very, for me, a very Western notion of making work, which is being in your studio, hiding your work until you're ready to show it, and then showing it in usually a white cube space. And so a lot of artists in Cambodia were starting to replicate this model and thinking that that's how you achieve a success as being an artist. And so I was challenging that and saying, no, you have to keep your work like out in the community, and you have to be open to engaging with your people, with our people. And so this was a 24-hour durational piece, creating my own public square of engagement. And each person in white is an artist that sits for an hour at a time. And then anybody can come up to the empty chair and have conversations with the artist that is seated there for an hour. And I took 4 of those shifts myself. And so again, this ran for 24 hours. So my work is really, it does disrupt, it agitates, it intervenes. These are all intentional things that I know that it could have the ability to do. I don't actually go out there thinking it's gonna actually cause trouble and make controversies, but I know that because of my body that's hyper racialized and gendered and also sexualized, these things are going to come out in the dynamics that play out as you engage with the public. And so on this note of the photos extending the moments, like I love that about my documentation, that the photos exist to document and archive a certain moment, and they extend the performance further. But really it's the series of actions before and after that moment that's captured, that's my work. So my work is all the ways that lead up to the moment you see in the photograph and the moment after. And those are the encounters and exchanges And I'm going to really flash through some of my past work so we can get to the core of the Buddhist Bug, which is what's on exhibit today. And so I always get asked this question of why performance? And my response is always, well, why not? Because for me, performance is both immediate and it takes time, and the body is necessary, the body matters, and performance happens anywhere, anytime, for and by anyone. Performance for me as an art form is an obvious act of decolonization. There's a freedom I feel in performing in public spaces and enacting fantastical, mythical heroines that's extremely powerful and necessary, right? So it's about sort of these everyday gestures and activities, but it's also this fantastical, mythical heroines that I get to play, that are my alter egos, in which I get to reclaim power, occupy public spaces, and reimagine a sort of hyper presence. And you'll see that with the Red Chador, there is a mixing, this is what I do, a mixing of religious aesthetics. So this is what my people wear, Cambodian Muslims and Malaysian Muslims, and I would argue Thai Muslims too, wear the telekung. You might know it as a chador or a burqa. Those are like kind of the common words for it, which is what I use to title my work for that sort of global imagination. But I'm also mixing, right? So the Red Chador is a mix of the sci-fi interests with the Catholic pageantry, with the Muslim, and that's this piece. And you'll see that, so this is my most recent piece that's ongoing. And we were able to perform it on the 20th anniversary of 9/11 recently in Bellevue, which is the city known to house Microsoft. It's a very business-oriented city, and you're seeing an image here with an encounter with a security guard. And these moments happened, I mean, whatever you're imagining this could be, it is that. They are not only hyper aware that we are around, they are literally radioing that they have eyes on us and they see we are doing things, and then we would hear things on the radio because it's on and we're nearby. They would say things like, and they don't speak. I have eyes on them and they don't speak, over, you know? So it's very interesting just to overhear these conversations and how sort of hyper vigilant it got really quickly, and all we were doing was entering the mall and exiting the mall, a total just a line procession. And I get to make sort of these beautiful moments out of these photographs in collaboration with different photographers. And then, you know, that extension of the persona goes into all sorts of works. And you'll see that I use a lot of textile in my work. And so this quotation I've said before, for me, because my roots are in spoken word poetry and writing, and once upon a time where the writing of my stories rooted in a narrative voice was so important for me as a young person, sort of asserting who I am as an Asian American woman, and sort of reclaiming the language that, you know, the English language that taunted and teased my own parents and our own upbringing. It was really important for me to own it through storytelling and through this art of spoken word poetry. But what I learned as I traveled the world with the poetry was that not a lot of people could understand the nuance of my stories and of my work as a poet, because, and this is where I figured out that the English language really failed me. You know, this thing that I learned to perfect and to come to terms with really did not work for me as an international tool of conveying ideas and more complicated stories, that they could feel how powerful it was for me to perform a poem, like a memorized poem, and they could see the passion, but they could not understand what I was talking about, or why I was so angry, or why I had such difficulties. So this was a really big moment for me, in realizing the shortcomings of a form like a spoken poetry, a performed text. And so this quote, "Meters and meters of textile act as skin as a way for the surface of my body to extend into public spaces and as a metaphoric device for stories to spread across an expanse," is exactly what I'm trying to do. You know, kind of recombine the narrative into something else, that the stories are still here, but they're taking an abstracted form, and they're taking a different method to reach people. And then you get these mythical heroines, right? And this is about, really, it is about finding beauty. I think that as someone who has a very politicized voice, I think the burden of representation is big. And sometimes you only see, you know, the ugliness of the world because you're fighting so hard for your place in it, and it's constant. And so when I returned to Cambodia, I really got to experiment with looking for beauty and sculpting with the wind, like things I never got to do in America because I was so entrenched in my art being activists, right? So then I got to sort of really reinvent myself through textile and through all these ways in which they were absolutely created with this notion that I get to, you know, occupy the textile that means something to me, but also in these spaces, in whether it's a rice field or an alleyway or some dirty steps that are terribly urinated on. This doesn't show you the ugliness of it. But you know, and I felt a joy in making work that I hadn't before. And it was a different kind of joy, and I didn't want it to leave my body, and I didn't want it to leave you know, the newer body of work. And so here, this notion of the returning diaspora, that is a really big part of what you've seen in the Buddhist Bug work and in sort of more on these other works. And I really think about, you know, the gift of returning to, you know, a country that my parents called home for a really long time before the war. And in returning, because of my political activism, what I realized were you get to return by choice, but you also return by force. And that is through deportation and the effects of the American criminal justice system and a broken immigration system, and how it targets Cambodian American, mostly men, who made a terrible mistake during their youth by committing a felony, but getting really everything thrown at them. Even after serving their time in prison, they, upon release, are returned to Cambodia. Now, this return is false because they were also born in contested space. They were born in the refugee camps, which are not, you know, belonging to either Thailand or Cambodia, or actually it belongs to Thailand, some would argue. And so, you know, there are all these things that are in place that force them back to Cambodia. And so what you're looking at is one of the last photos I took in 2015 upon our departure. It literally is the day before we leave Cambodia to come and reside back after a 5-year residency in Cambodia to return back here to the US. And I called forth a lot of my friends who've been targeted, who have been forced there. And it's a really hard life for them. They've really had to give up a lot. And some of them don't make it, like, meaning, yes, they died in really brutal ways, in harsh conditions. And so we made this photo with them And I open up this discussion about the Buddhist bug with this because that is what I talk about, the diasporic dilemma for so many of us who were born between multiple cultures and who hold this place. And the Buddhist bug is sort of a way for me to channel all of that, but in a joyful way. I think what I alluded to earlier was how much I love textile and fabric and the feeling of that. And so the Buddhist bug and this idea of the diasporic dilemma is really about, coming into a situation in which you understand your bicultural identity, but it's a constant push and pull between the cultures, between national identity, cultural identity, and political identities even. And so there's a constant insider outsider shift that is always in flux. 1 minute you're an insider, the next minute you're an outsider. And this is also about being, sometimes you're a local, sometimes you're a foreigner. It's sort of, you're never enough of one thing. And so I was thinking about that as I was creating the Buddhist bug, and this notion of, instead of seeing that being caught in between sort of two shifting kind of, sometimes they're very counter to each other, instead of seeing that as a problematic space, what if I saw that as a place for creation, a place of beauty, place of joy that can, that can take a form. And so here, the creation of the Buddhist bug originated actually in 2009, a year after the birth of my first child, Minara. And what happened was, I was thinking about the exhibition that I was going to have as a graduate student. I had just given birth to my first child, and I was thinking about the diasporic dilemma and this constant fluctuation. And I was thinking about how to connect 2 points that are completely different and sometimes opposing. Really, that was my problem to solve. And I didn't know exactly what it was. I just knew I had to be some kind of being that understood this, that could maybe take this on. And then we were gifted this play tunnel, this collapsible play tunnel for my then like 4 or 5 month old child. And she was playing with this wonderful thing. And I looked at it and I was like, oh my gosh, like this is the form, like this is what I want. I mean, it makes so much sense because it can be this small coiled up thing and you could put it away. And I could literally, again, this is the refugee influence, carry it on my back, or it can extend and become something more. And really, it could be a tunnel, it could be a bridge. Like I'm starting to, all the things start to come together. So the bug is definitely modeled after the Muslim head covering, and it is also modeled after the Buddhist monk robes. And this is a result of my first return to Cambodia in 2004. It was really eye-opening to return as an adult without your parents and any family member. I was invited as an artist in residence and to a project called the Mekong Project. And this is, I don't think this is a digital camera. I think this is like film camera or disposable or something. But I was floored by the amount of orange I saw in the landscape. So I started to be sneaky and take photos obsessively of monks. And I was really obsessed with it and took like lots of photos, and they were everywhere and they were doing everything. And like, I couldn't escape the orange. I was so overwhelmed by the presence of the orange. And when I finally did more research on Buddhism, I also realized that the Islam, the Muslim identity that my parents carried with them, who, we grew up so devoutly Muslim in America, how important it was for them to salvage that and to pass that legacy on, because they were in a country that was 98% Buddhist. So that feeling of being overwhelmed, that led to the creation of the Buddhist Bug, plus my joyful interest and obsession with the orange. Like, just that combination to me with the child's tunnel, and this is where like hybridity and this sort of layered way of thinking about making all kind of collide and come together as an artist. As I sketch this thing into being, it starts to take this incredible shape. A prototype was created in 2009, but the whole scale and scope of the work didn't take shape until I landed for my US Fulbright residency in 2011. Really, I needed to touch the ground, to be amongst my people and my land, for this creature to really come to life and have a narrative shape. And so a lot of the time is spent on location scouting, looking at where the bug could be that's meaningful, that's beautiful, that's impactful, and then creating little vignettes, like what would be of interest to create this curious creature. And the other thing I was playing with was this idea that the bug is constantly traveling. You don't know where the bug is headed. You just know that the bug is on some kind of vehicle of transportation trying to get somewhere. And so, and I'm showing you a lot of the behind the scenes because it takes a whole lot of crew to make every single one of these images. And I wanted to kind of read a little bit of the haiku that's part of my artist statement, share with you that the Buddhist Bug is a creation myth sprung from my interest in hybridity, transcendence, and otherness. With the Buddhist Bug series, it's about coming to terms with creating from a place of turmoil and empowerment, in experiencing the diasporic dilemma and using that in-betweenness as a place for creation and wonder as much as wander. So this place is a home unknown, yet familiar still, displaced is a home. So you see that narrative, that text has never left me. It's found a different way in, and it's found a different place into the work. Although I began conceiving this series in 2009, the work would not take root until I physically landed and took residency in Cambodia in 2011, returning after 35 years of absence. As a diasporic artist, I can't help but excavate themes related to body memories, belonging, and fractured identities. And those 5 years of taking residency were exactly the 5 years I lost as a child too. So I also can't help but see the sort of poetic justice of that, and a kind of compassion that's come back into my life. So some of the stories behind this is this one, Spiral Alley, was an image that won the Sovereign Asian Art Prize in Hong Kong. And it's also one of our most favorite pieces. And when I say ours, I mean myself and my longtime collaborator, my husband, Masahiro Sugano, who shot this photo. My husband was looking at the wall that's on the other side. There are all these really old eroded walls with what's called the colonial yellow. And, you know, it was such an interesting wall with a lot of layers and where the paint was falling apart. But I looked at it and I was like, oh, I guess it's an interesting backdrop. And then I turned around and I saw this staircase and I'm like, but that's it. Like that says home for the bug. Like for me, it's about how beautiful her body fits in this shape and how so then this is the story, right? That she's traveling in this cyclone and she comes up into this staircase that is in many ways beautifully fits the bug's body. And then in the video version of this, she is kind of just looking into the house, and so you're not sure if this is her home, or is she visiting someone, or how did she get there, like all these questions that I think is interesting for the audience to try to figure out a narrative for the work. Reflection number one is really about seeing yourself reflected in someone else. And this woman was also our guide to this sort of displaced community of fishermen, mostly Cham Muslim fishing village, because there's a big construction project that's about to take place there. And so they're about to, this entire community here who's lived all their lives fishing off of the Mekong River in Phnom Penh, they're about to lose it all. And so I felt that the work in capturing both the rural and the urban settings of Cambodia needed to, in many ways, document this moment that's about to change. We're about to never see this again, and that is true. And so part of my process is going to these communities several times. Like before an image is taken, there are several trips taken to talk to people. I speak Khmer, but my Khmer is broken. And so to make sure I'm fully understood, I always take a translator with me to make sure the nuance of everything is fully understood. And this woman was so open and was so game to helping. And I would share with her images and sketches of what I would want to do and how important it was to capture this village in the context of the Buddhist Bug project. She was always smiling, and she was supposed to get someone to help us row on the boat, but then the man that she relied on was a bit lazy and late. And so she was so powerful in that she was like, you know what, forget them, I'm gonna do it, I'm gonna row you, don't you worry. And it was just such a like a go-getter kind of attitude that was so powerful to witness. And so this is the image that came from that. And it was all her. Now, this was a very risky and complicated image to create, as you can imagine, the issues of balance on an old boat. I do have my one assistant as the legs over there. We have a second boat that is taking the actual photo. I do not swim. So there's like all these challenges, right? But I'm like so game for this. And she's, so game. And so we just do it. And I think that's the spirit of making work in Southeast Asia, and specifically in Cambodia. You just kind of do it and you go with it and you see where it goes. Orange tangerine, both a bridge and a tunnel across and over. So the Buddhist bug is a creature belonging in this world, yet appearing to be from another universe, set intentionally among school children from my birth village, an ox cart driver, a Muslim fishing village, and random people in a busy alleyway. My works engage everyday people in an effort to include them into conversations rarely afforded them in the context of contemporary art. From daylight to nightfall, inside classrooms and outside amusement parks, along stairwells and street corners, the Buddhist bug appears, present, visible, and ever curious. And so I think that's another thing to think about, is the idea that contemporary art, for me, it's very important that it shouldn't be removed from everyday people and from the ordinary lives of everyday people. That is why the work in the other pieces tend to disrupt like an everydayness, or put my body right out into public spaces, especially very busy public spaces. But what's so wonderful is like So I have all these stories. Every single one of these images has a ton of stories that I never get to really talk about. So for example, this one, Off the Golden Ship, was a piece we did not go in thinking we were going to make. It was happenstance because we had just come from the Mekong displaced fishing village. And then we stopped by because this temple had this golden ship. That ship there was much larger on the outside of this temple. And so we just stopped in, me and my crew just stopped in, and then we noticed all these women, all these older women. Now keep in mind, because of the genocide, we don't have a lot of elders of this generation. So A, that was already phenomenal. B, these were Buddhist monks. These were female Buddhist monks. So we had just stumbled onto a Buddhist temple that is home to female Buddhist monks, old female Buddhist monks. So in that moment, it just sort of gathered and was like, oh my gosh, you guys, like the energy here, we have to, the bug has to come back out. Like, you got to stay overtime, pull everything out, let's do this, and let's talk to the women. And then we talked to them to see if they were interested in being part of it. We were going to be like, oh, if they don't want to be, it's okay. Let's just make sure we get the golden ship. But, you know, myself and my partner, we were like, but it would be really great to have them because they are the elders. Like they need to be in this photo. And so the head woman, I don't think she's in the photo. She was the oldest woman there, and she was like, okay, everybody, let's pray to Lokta, which is like the elder spirit, in order to see if Lokta will give us permission for you to be here to do this photograph. And so I'm like, okay, that's cool. Let's do this thing. Lots of incense. And then the woman went into this chant with speaking in tongues. I had never witnessed anything like this in a Buddhist like ritual. And we start like to open our eyes like this. Is everybody like hearing and seeing this? And we're like, yes, this is like crazy. She's like got the spirit in her. And then she's doing her thing. She's really into it. And then she's done. And then we all open our eyes and she goes, yes, Lokta has said, yes, you may have the permission. And I'm like, oh my God, thank God. And then, you know, this image happens and we noticed that they were sewing the flags and stuff. And so that's incorporated into this. And all the women were asked, you know, with their consent, as in almost all of my images that are photographs like this, what they want to do, how they want to be placed, and what this piece is about. Like all of that is explained. And they may not get all of the nuance of this piece, but that's not what's important to me. What's important is that we're having a conversation where they get to ask me questions about what this piece is about and how their role fits into this project. And so this is what I mean by the conversations that contemporary art rarely affords communities like this. My reinvention from the past before the last breath is turmoil. I think it's this spiritual turmoil for me, being in a mixed family myself in terms of having children with a Japanese Buddhist, and then myself as a practicing Muslim. All of that is turmoil for me, like trying to figure out religious identity simultaneous to spiritual identity, simultaneous to an assimilation that is an ongoing process in how I'm reinventing myself and my identity and what my kids are holding on to versus what their grandparents are instilling in them. So all these sort of complications. And then you have the factor of the world, how the world sees us, right? And the ways in which the world tends to flatten identities so easily. Lots of stories behind this. This is in my birth village, the old cinema in Battambang. This is one of the periods of time when Cambodia had a golden renaissance, the period where arts and culture and filmmaking were like experimental, were ahead of all the other countries in Southeast Asia. And what you're looking at here is a Art Deco inspired theater that was running before the Khmer Rouge came. And when the Khmer Rouge came, they really annihilated the arts and the culture sector. And this is a result of that. When you walk into this, if you look really close to the photo, you can also see the hand painted numbers on the wooden chairs. Those are the seat numbers. Like it's so beautiful when we walked into this space. It's completely abandoned. And the ceiling, that Art Deco ceiling, is falling apart and the gaps of light. And I think when I walked into this space, I was like, the bug has to be here because we don't know how much longer this building is going to be here. It's all getting destroyed for newer buildings. You know, no one has the money to invest in the renovation of something like this. And it's also, for a lot of Khmers, it's an eyesore. It's a marker of the past. They don't want the past. They want to move on. They want the future. They want to look forward. The bug, I also show the work really large. The skin they sit in wraps around like loose virtues, haram, halal, truths. So for the Buddhist bug, I mean, for me, the Buddhist bug as a displaced creature is destined to travel and wander amongst the in-between. The bug longs for stillness while on a constant journey. The bug is a source for refuge while on a perpetual search for home. The bug is both a bridge and an obstacle. Between here and there is a distance uncharted. Saffron sea unfolds. And so this is what I mean by like this constant perpetual search for home. And as an artist, you know, I have never been able to quietly create works inside a studio space. That's a luxury I've never had. Instead, my works are performances taken into the streets and rice fields, classrooms and hawker stands, energetic sites where everyday people and daily life occur. Only after the site-specific performance does the work return as photographic or cinematic artifacts, works of art that are then shared to continue the storytelling element inside and outside of Cambodia. And we had our own, as I said, the installation as fabric only and as a sculpture, for me, that's not the work. The work is when it's activated. And so anytime a museum asks for the installation, as Amanda knows, I always pitch that you can't have it unless you can have a live performance. It just doesn't go without the live body to activate it. And so I've been really lucky to be able to tour the world with this work, which consistently brings joy to a lot of people. And I think that's what's kept this piece going, that's kept my interest in doing it. And I think children are so wondrous. Like children have a way, even in my more political work with the Red Chador, children have a way of disarming things for parents. That is across the board of what I've experienced. And here, it was so wonderful to be in this sort of Bodhi tree area in Australia. And these kids were just having such a blast, you know, because it's art that they can touch, right? It's art that they can tickle and kind of sit and be with. And so I've really had this amazing tour of the work. And there's something about this exchange of energy that continues to fuel the work and to bring people in. People who have never engaged in performance get very involved in this. And I don't even say a word, as some of you know, that it's all gestures and it's all presence and it's all eye contact. It's, you know, bringing people in, inviting people in to have this fantastic moment together. And I think I've told the story of this man here with this suit who kept coming 3 or 4 times with his drink. I didn't know who he was. This is in Malaysia. And I finally like just kind of egg him on to come, and we make eye contact. And once I lock eye contact, you know, it's very hard for you all to look away. Once I lock your eyes in, you sort of come in. And so he did that, and he just looked at me for a really long time. And then, you know, I would smile. And I think that just, he did this. He sort of, you know, came by me, and I had this moment of just putting my head on his shoulder. And I was told later by the galleryist that this man like never engages in the work. Like they don't know how I did it, but this man is super stoic and stern, and like he's, you know, he's a collector, but he usually doesn't come to these performances. And it was just really, you know, it was a powerful moment. Like something in him wanted to go further, and he just needed the invitation, right? That's what we all need. We just want to be invited. We want to be invited to the game. We want to be invited to the party. And then we have the Carlos Museum here. The moment was this past Sunday, and that honing of the hyper presence. And then I got tired and had to be laid down. But that also, because my knees, y'all, like I am not this like 30-year-old wonderful knee person anymore. The knees are the first to go. But these 2 moments, you know, really did it for me. One is with Amanda's child, and I couldn't tell it was you through the mask. So it was a really beautiful moment that we shared there. And I love that you took your time and just sort of let your child kind of get into it. And you also like, you know, just gave him permission to do even the pinching of my nose and stuff. I thought that was great. And then the other image there, you see, I still remember their names. G is the young boy in red, and Mariah. Mariah kept coming to me, and she had a whole conversation with me. Again, I'm not talking. I'm just, you know, I'm doing my thing. And Mariah's like, my brother, I'm trying to get my brother here. And I'm like, you know, and I'm like, okay, I'm going to go. And she took like 20 or 30 minutes before that child would come and engage. He kept going back and forth, and she kept kind of pushing him in, but he was like, no, I don't want to do it. And then once I laid down from my sort of taller position of being on my knees and laid down, that totally changed the dynamics for him. And it gave him permission and invitation to come forward. And then he did this. You know, this is a child who 30 minutes before would like not have it. I think my friend Crystal was also there trying to get him to come, and he would not have it. But then in the end, you know, I think I posted it on my Instagram too, a video that someone took where he was laughing. And then, you know, Mariah was had an interesting moment with me because I don't speak. She's translating my gestures for her brother. So she's got this whole narrative in place for me, for her brother. So those are, what was it? Yes. I was looking at the child's shoe, and suddenly Mariah's like, oh, she really likes your shoes. And I was like, okay, I'm going with this. Yes. So all of those very genuine and beautiful moments. And the legs were in the African gallery there. And really, I want to also end with this photo to return us to the issue of the diaspora and this notion of returning by choice and by force, like this thing to remind us all of what's happening in the world right now with all sorts of returns, right? And then to think about, you know, when I look at this image and I know all of these guys' stories, I also see the bug's presence, and I can't help but feel that tension of wanting joy, wanting to celebrate, but at the same time, like holding these very, you know, traumatizing stories in kind of the same space together. So that sort of ends it for the Buddhist Bug. And I would love it if we had more of a conversation, or I'm not sure how we're doing the next portion.
Question.
First question is from one of our curators, Megan O'Neill. Everyone hear me? Thank you for this wonderful and inspiring talk. Your performances take place in so many locations. Can you talk more about the people who encounter the bug and the ways their words or reactions inspire you for future performances or the creation of new art or poetry? And she's looking forward to the event on Saturday.
Oh, thank you, Megan. I think like it's always about that exchange of the energy. I think Sunday's event fueled me so much, especially when I didn't know what to expect here in Atlanta at all. And I didn't know who was going to show up. And I thought that everybody who came had such a generous spirit. That's very helpful. Now, I've never had an encounter of belligerent, like a belligerent and unwanted energy with the Buddhist bug. And maybe it's because it's an orange worm and it's like very hard to politicize an orange worm. I've had one incident in Singapore where there was an older man who was shouting her down. Before as we were setting up, and we had gotten permission to perform in front of the Sultan Mosque in Singapore, which is a very iconic mosque. And there were Muslims involved, including myself and my legs, and the curators were all Muslims. And there was a man, an older gentleman who was shouting us down in Malay and basically saying things like, "This is so haram, this is against God." So like, these are all the things that I've already been prepared for. And that happens, you know, they're very far and few in between. And then the first time this project was put up in Java Arts Cafe in Plumping in about, I think 2012 was my first exhibition of the work. And then the patrons of the cafe, there was one woman who used to patronize it all the time. She protested it and said, "This is really disturbing that you would do this to Buddhism. I'm very offended and you need to take it down or I'm not going to come back to your cafe." So there's that point of it from Buddhists who also don't appreciate it. But these again are, that's like two incidences, right? All the other ones in all the other spaces have been really wonderful, loving, generous. And then I would say also the photos themselves of being in Cambodia in all the different places, those have always been full of different stories and sort of different moments of just talking to people and knowing where they're coming from and talking about this work. Now, there are also moments when they think that this work is a ghost story. So I get that too, like, oh, this is like a monster story or a ghost story. So it's really interesting that I'm in this this curated exhibition here. But I also allow people to make those leaps as they want. Like, this is the fantasy part that is very important to me, especially in the context of Cambodia. I want people to dream and imagine the fantastic. I think that is very important in order for us as a people to move forward beyond the realities. Oh, did I see a hand there?
Your photographs, I love photography, and your photographs are just heart capturing. Are they at all available for us?
Yes,
They're just amazing.
Yes,
They're just
they are.
amazing.
They're editioned in 5 and they're 3 different sizes in this.
Yay.
Yes. So
Well, that
yes.
makes me even happier. It was wonderful. Thank you so much. I'm so glad that I came.
Thank you. This is also one of my favorite because this is in my birth village. So all these locations are really meaningful to me. And it's this is both Muslim and Khmer, Muslim and Khmer Cambodian students in this village coming together to be in this classroom and enact this. And as you can see with the bug, I think one of the things I didn't say is that for the bug thinks that the bug is supposed to be there. There's nothing wrong with her. Okay. The bug is like, this is my place. This is where I'm supposed to be. But then suddenly the image, when you're looking at it from the viewer, you're like, everybody else is looking at her funny. And so she starts to feel like, wait a minute, why are you looking at me like that? Right. So it's like, I'm teasing out this question of otherness, like who is the other in this? And like, who's looking at whom? Right? There's like a meta looking and then all the other layers of looking.
Love that about Campus Meal, the video, where you can see the woman who's coming by. She's like, well, what does a bug eat? You know, and then she serves what she thinks a bug eats. And the bug's like,
The
what
bug
is this?
is vegetarian
Yeah.
and she serves like a big fish, right? So if the bug is Buddhist, she probably won't eat that fish.
In connection to Cynthia's question, I can't remember. Did you say who's the photographer is?
Yeah, the photographer changes, but a predominant amount of prints are from my partner, Masahiro Sugano, my collaborating partner and life partner.
How long does it take for each one? Because I think it's very crucial about the lighting and that sort of thing.
Yes. It's a lot of work. Every one of these we run like a production. So it's a lot of pre-production, which means location scouting and permission and putting our team in place. And then we go to the site and we kind of have an idea of the image we want. And so that's where you're noting the lighting, right? This is lit in a very professional way in order to get this image. There are other ones I didn't include in here, like there's a whole sunrise one, and that's, you have to capture actually during the sunrise. But all these it's a tremendous lot of work. Like this one, there's a guy running with a flash on the side so that it can, shine in a very specific way on my face so that it could be lit. So I think that what's wonderful about these images is nothing is photoshopped. Like this is like real. I mean, what is Photoshop is maybe if I'll iron out like the orange wrinkles on some of the stuff if it doesn't look right. But for the most part, it's not like I'm photoshopping the legs and the face together. That never happens. This thing happens in real time and as like a real, image in this landscape.
And so the feet are different, right?
The feet are always different and they can be male or female. And that's always been really great to have. I think the Australian one, that performance was a really awesome male feet. I don't know. These feet are male that are over there. These.
So I have one question from Zoom. Could you talk more about the Buddhist Bug as an archive? Do you see these images exist and function differently when viewed in a digital space and online? Also, hi from Boston. So deeply inspired and moved by your talk.
Did you say hi from Boston?
Yes.
Oh, hello, Boston. As an archive, yes, they are an archive of a Cambodia that I was in for this duration that is disappearing. So that I knew going into making these images. So these images were made in 2012, 2014, and 2015 on our way out. So the night images, there's actually a collection of, I just didn't put it in here. There's 4 more in this collection. And then there's the video made of 20,000 images. That's a time lapse one, which is going to be screened on one of the buildings here. And I have a snippet of it in the beginning that maybe we can go back and show. But the archive is that I knew the Cambodia I was experiencing from 2011 to 2015 was a moment of massive and rapid change. I saw it as I was there, how quickly the landscape, the skyline was shifting and how much construction was happening. And so I was keenly aware that the Phnom Penh that we were experiencing, or the Cambodia that we were experiencing at this time, may not be the same in 5, definitely not in 10 or 20 years. And so, you know, amusement parks like this was important to see. Even these village scenes, this is in the Little Mosque on the River video, of making this specialized mud fish. This is a very popular dish, but also it's sold to the diaspora. Like people in the diaspora like go back and get like a luggage full of this fish to bring back. And it's, you know, it depends on which village is making it. Like the better ones are from the Cham Muslim village. And then archives like this one. This is a very important image for me. And of course, it's, you don't know it until I tell the story, but this is my grandmother's land. And this is the original land that is ours, that is supposed to be in our family, that we had to abandon and leave when we fled for the refugee camps. But when I went back and a guide took me around, just someone from the village, I was poking around and asking if people knew my grandmother and my grandfather. And I said her name, and then they were like, oh, yes, let's show you her land. Let us show you where the family grew up, because this is it. And they walked me to it, and they all knew my family and this land that was theirs. And they said, you know, obviously there are new people that are living there now, so it's not ours anymore, which is fine. But for me to walk that land and to see that and to touch it and to know like that life, you know, happened there, and that my life is like literally connected to this specific plot of land, and now that it exists as part of the Buddhist Bug project, is really a powerful part of this archive. That I didn't go in there really thinking about it as archival work in that sense. I just wanted to capture something that I knew would have meaning for me in the future, and that would relate to this diasporic dilemma that I had been exploring in the work.
That was really powerful, but there are more questions.
Yes.
These two are connected. One is, can you talk about the legs, the purpose, the logistics? You know, the person is completely encapsulated, the posing. And as hard as it is to kneel on your knees as the head, it seems even harder to be the feet. What advice do you give to the legs to help them through the experience?
Oh my gosh, is this a former traumatized legs that's speaking? I want to know.
I don't know. Well, it was Megan again, so we'll ask.
So it's always consent. That's first of all very important in this whole situation. Like I've asked people once upon a time in the early years of the bug in Cambodia. I've approached people that I've wanted as legs, and I'm like, you know, you're kind of a model, and I have a modeling job for you. It's kind of a different modeling job, and I don't know if you're game, but I would love your legs to be part of it. So like there's that, right? Like you know, this is usually like when it's the third or fourth person on the list, and I'm like, okay, we're going in the model. And so, you know, you've got to tell her like what this is about. But usually there's a lot of things. It's who's available at the time. It's usually one of my assistants in my crew. And then sometimes it's just excited folks that are around, either younger artists, or it's sometimes someone who volunteers somebody else because they're like, this person will do it. Like they just want to be part of it. And of course, everybody is compensated. That's the thing. I always make sure everyone is compensated. That's a very important part of it. And then there's a lot of like making sure they're comfortable. Like there's always asking them, like, especially in like the Siklo ones, like this woman was also very tall. This was someone who worked at Java Arts Cafe, and she was the cook, and she really wanted to be part of this, but she was tall.
She has
And so
giant feet.
she is like 5'11" or something and big built. And so it was like a whole thing of rigging this. And what you don't see is that to get that angle for myself, I'm holding onto a rope. There's a rope so that I don't fall forward, that I'm hanging on to. So this is rigged in all the things you don't see. And then I always tell the legs, we're always shouting like, are you okay? Are you all right? And, it's porous. So obviously it's not a fabric that, you can see out of it and you can breathe out of it, but you basically are chilling for the most part. That is like what I've told the legs on Sunday, like you're chilling, but you got to be alive and you got to respond. So I always prepare them for the tickles. And I believe on Sunday there were feathers involved. Someone like had feathers. That was what she was telling us. So there's always these sort of just interesting moments that have happened, and different stories.
Manawachipi absolutely loved being the feet on Sunday, but it was interesting because she said there were tickles, there were feet. I mean, there were feathers, but there was also somebody who came and tugged at her feet. And I don't think that happened to the head end. It was interesting that they were just kind of pulling. And on Saturday, the woman who is the head of the Women's Refugee Network in Clarkston is going to be the Bug feet. So we're really excited about that.
It's going to be very powerful. I mean, that's an honor, like for her to do this with me.
She feels that way too. So we're excited about that. Her name is Shushma Batakori.
Yeah.
So
yeah,
join us on Sunday at Refuge Coffee.
And I think we're going to have a pretty good turnout
Saturday
for that. So please come to that. I think with the different energies and the diversity that's going to be there, just because I know a lot of people that are coming through, and it's going to be an interesting experience. We have another question here.
Who would encounter this, even if it's not in person, but please forgive my ignorance, but the bug itself, is it wanting to get back to its motherland or homeland, or what exactly is the message that is being delivered or conveyed rather through? So it's obviously because I'm missing a lot of the history of this effort, but what exactly is someone who is witnessing this in person or otherwise capturing as a message from your effort?
Yeah, well, let me ask you, what do you think? Like looking at this and like hearing a little bit of what I've said, what do you think it could be?
I was impressed by your childhood experiences, which were not necessarily pleasant. And so my perception is that somehow you want to deliver a constructive counter message that, no, that's not the right way in humanity. That's not the right way to treat people or live together in a society. But I'm not being able to understand the the positive or the constructive element that you're trying to convey to the community or to the society. it's possible
Yeah.
I'm missing something totally, but
Well, I think it's also, when you look at this image, do you find it troubling, or do you find it curious or joyful?
so that
or-
could be my ignorance part. I don't find it troubling at all. I find it
Yeah, what was it?
unique.
Unique. Okay.
Something that I have never seen before,
Mhm.
and I don't think I'll ever see again, unless
Correct.
it's you doing it. Um, so it is palpable. There's no question about it because it's in display in real life. It's actual performance. But is it antagonistic to Buddhism, or is it um, agonistic to to a collective effort between Islam and Buddhism to move forward in a way different from what your personal experiences have been? That's what I'm not
Hmm.
being able to.
Yeah.
gather.
And I think it's okay to question that. I think that one of the reasons that I put these two things together is really to have people imagine the possibility that one can be both Buddhist and Muslim in this entity. This entity, when you look at this Buddhist bug, even by namesake, you think they're Buddhist, right? But you actually have to look closer to see the other elements that they are also executing a modest dress code that is Islamic. And then because I've modeled the head after the hijab, you now know that definitely it's the artist's intention to make this both Muslim and Buddhist. And so I don't have an overt message that people may want me to say about this other than having compassion for hybridity and for hybrid identities, and not to flatten things, not to move towards a one dimensionality or a simplistic thinking. So what I really love about this series of work is that I myself as an artist have been able to get myself out of having the pressure of feeling like I have to have a political message or an overt message. That could I be an artist that brings joy to somebody who looks at this image or has a performative experience with me? Can I be someone to change that scowl into a smile, or that person that was resisting or that child that was resisting coming forward? Could they just have a real experience through this art, through the framework of this constructed experience? Could they then just share a moment where we forget everything except for this odd experience that they know there is an older Asian woman trapped in this orange, right? Like that is, so I always talk about, like, there is the magic that art does so well, and that is the suspension of disbelief. In all of the productions, I've told you that we go to these spaces multiple times. People see us and our structures. They see us constructing this situation. They see me unfolding this collapsible tunnel structure and slipping myself in it, sculpting this thing and slipping the legs into it. And when all of that comes to life and that moment happens and the camera comes on, everybody, like every single time, has that gaping, like they cannot believe that they are in this world now. So there is a suspension of disbelief. We all know that is orange fabric, and there are two human beings, unless she does yoga very well, there are two human beings on different ends. But oh my God, what is it that I'm looking at? And why am I filled with this unexplainable thing that's happening to me that makes me want to do a double take, that makes me want to be curious, that makes me want to say, why the orange? You know, why the head covering? Why this village of children? Why is she constantly on these modes of transportation? What is she trying to say? Is she coming in peace, or not? And so those are all the things that I think are valid things to ask yourself. And it's okay that it isn't fully explained, because that's part, I think, of what art has to have the viewer do, is to figure it out beyond what the artist has put in place for you. I've only given you hints of things, and even if I tell you the whole thing, you'll still have a different engagement, and I'm totally okay with that. And I think, you know, this piece is done for me in Cambodia, but where I want to see it go next is actually to like the deserts of the Middle East, or back to like the origins of where Islam was, which is in, you know, Saudi Arabia or Morocco, or just like that area. Like I would like to see this in that setting. Like, can this creature be accepted in a more orthodox practicing of Islam? That to me would be very interesting to figure out.
I loved what you said about the way that children interacted with it. And one of my favorite moments from Saturday was a little boy who saw the head, and then he went around and he saw the feet. And it was a moment of pure suspension of disbelief, but also one of great compassion on his part, because he started saying, does she sleep? Does she sleep here?
Yes.
And do you feed her? You know, it was genuine concern for the bug as a living creature. It was very sweet.
Thank you. I mean, and I want to sort of add to that, you know, I mean, one of the things that I really love about the bug, and part of the impetus for this exhibition in general, was to give shape to these different issues and ideas and feelings and things, so that we could enact control over it, so that we could take ownership over it, so that we could start to think about the way in which it impacts us. And I think that that's sort of the power of art, that it can give shape to these things that have no form, that have no shape. And so the idea that the bug, for, you know, to me, it is representing all of those paradoxes, right? Both conflict between Muslims and Buddhists, and the future of unity between them. I think you know, the idea that most refugees, wherever they land, they think, well, when I get back home, but the reality is they're not going home. And so how do you embody that constant tension? And I think that that's, in a sense, what the bug is doing. Like the fact that it has all this space fills it with all of those paradoxes. And then it can contort based on where it is as a result.
Yeah, and that ability to take up space was you know, implemented based on this need of mine. I wanted to come back to these bigger images of the bug here. The idea that the bug can coil into something really small, as if making herself less visible, to take up less space, is a very big concept in, you know, Asian societies too. Like, try not to use up too much space or make yourself known too well. That concept. And then when she can flourish fully, right? So like, she can flourish and really take up space and take up expanse, and really show the wondrousness or the possibility of who she could be if that right to exist wasn't denied her. Right? So like, that's part of like the conceptual framework of this too. And I think I love this work because I find so much joy, and this goes to the question earlier of performing. I mean, I'm coming upon mid-century, modern as an age. And it's, you know, it takes a lot of endurance to do this, to be on your knees mostly. And also just to not know how people are going to receive at any time, but to be so present, right? Because that takes a lot of energy to give. And I think a lot of people on Sunday whispered about like, oh, you have such confidence. Like, I'm so moved by your confidence, you know. I'm like, okay, that's great. And I never thought about it as that, you know. I just think this is my art. This is when I'm on. But I get a lot of joy from that, from just anybody being able to approach this work and have their moment with it and not understand all the complexities that of course I've built into it, but there's no way anyone can get all of that unless you do your thorough research, and that takes a lot more time to invest. But I'm also okay with the superficial, you know, read of it being just a wondrous and curious experiment of energies being exchanged in space, or even what's happening between the viewer and the image, or the viewer and the video, because that's what art is. Art is that in between, whatever is happening in between, that's adding to the work.
Thank you so much. And thank you for all your questions.
Oh, there's
And-
one final one. Should we? No,
What should we do?
we do one final.
First, I liked it when I first saw it in the gallery. But on Sunday, when you were there and the foot person was there, it came to life and I loved it. And I loved the interaction everybody had with it. So I wanted to thank you. And then also today, I came in very angry because I've been listening to the Senate hearing for
Oh.
Ketanji Brown Jackson today. So angry. And this calmed me. So now I feel calm. Now I may get angry when I go back outside, but this was wonderful. So thank you again.
Thank you. Thank you, everybody online too.
And come on Saturday. at
Yes,
noon.
Refuge Coffee. 12 noon, right?
Yeah, 12 noon.
Is that what they're seeing? Oh. Oh, so Pat was from Boston. Yes, he's a curator. Oh, Sam was there. All these people. Hi. Yes, I can't wait. Yep, 12 noon.